I recently had someone reach out to me about how to add a D-ring or a loop for a D-ring or a lobster claw to this travel tissue cover. And this is a tutorial you can find for free on my blog. You can buy a printable version of the pattern that has no ads in my Etsy shop. I'm going to show you how to make the box corners, and I'm going to show you how to add a little loop so that you can either add a D-ring or like a D-ring with lobster clasp. Because this is nice if you want to hang it from your water bottle or your purse or whatever to add that loop. So basically we're going to be adding a loop like this so that it would come off of the side. For something this size, I would prefer to have a D-ring that is this size. So 1/2 inch. When you measure D-rings or the D-ring on a clasp, you don't measure the outside, you measure the space in between the metal, right? So what's inside the metal. So this one is basically 1 inch. It's just shy of 1 inch. This one is a 3/4. It's the same size as this. And then this one is 1/2. So I wish I had something like this that was a 1/2 inch, but I don't. So I'm going to make a loop and we're going to put a 1/2 inch lobster clasp on there. Now, why would you use one over the other? It really depends on what you have on the other end. So if you have a clasp on something, then you're going to want a clip, right? So it can hook like that. But say your purse has some clips, then you need a clasp to hang things from. You just need both parts to get it to work. So those are some different sizes. You would do the size based on what your project is. So I really want it to be small because there's not a lot of distance here and I want to keep it on that side. So that said, how big do I need to cut this fabric to make that little loop? The rule of thumb is you take the width that you need, the finished width. So we want this to be 1/2 inch. You multiply by 4 and you add 1/2 inch. So I'm going to cut this 2.5 inches wide. Then you decide how long you want it to be because this is going to go inside. So you're going to have at least 1/4 inch in that seam line. This one was made out of a 2.5 by 2.5 inch square. Seems kind of long. I want it to be a little bit shorter. So 2.5 by 2 inches is the size fabric we're going to use for this. This is going to be the exterior fabric, and I cut that to 6.5 by 5.5. The fabric that's going to be on the inside and also going to be this little accent band is going to be this tan water. And this one is cut to 5.5 by 7.5. The 2.5 by 2 inch piece to make our tab. So you're going to tear this over, and we're going to be folding it from the long part. It's only a 1/2 inch difference, so you do have to kind of pay attention. When it's a square, it doesn't matter as much. So I'm going to fold this and I'm going to fold it in half, wrong sides together, and press. And I'm going to open that back up and I'm going to fold each of these raw edges into that crease that we just made. So they're both going into the center. And then because it's so short and it's easy to do, I'm just going to fold that over. So the 2 folds I just made are here. This is the first one that we pressed, and I'm going to press that again. Now just to cool that off and really set those seams, I'm going to hit it with my quilter's clapper. So now it is just slightly over 1/2 inch. I'm going to test and make sure it's going to go through there nicely. Yep, that works. So that's how easy it is to make that tab. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to sew to hold that together. You can either just sew down the one side or you can sew down both sides for a little bit more of a polished look. Totally up to you. So we'll go to the sewing machine and we will get that done. Now I'm going to take my tab and I'm going to put it through the D-ring on that lobster claw, fold it in half, match those raw edges. So I'm just going to sew straight across just so that it will stay in place when we sew it into the tissue holder. You want to make sure you sew a little bit less than 1/4 inch from that edge so that that kind of basting stitch doesn't show once you put your whole tissue holder together. I'm going to prep the actual tissue box, the first step of that. So you're going to put these 2 pieces right side together. One of them is 1 inch shorter than the other, and that is the one that is going to create these 1/4 inch cute little accents right where your tissues come out. So what you're going to do is you're going to line up one of the short edges and have that sew 1 inch is there, and then just clip or pin that. We're going to sew down that side Then we are going to match the other edge. So you'll see there's a buckle, right? The 1-inch extra fabric in here. And I'm going to clip that side. So now when I go to the sewing machine, I'm going to sew with a 1/4-inch seam down both of these sides. I'm going to use just a little extra scrap of this fabric as a leader fabric so that when we sew, this is going to go over all of the feed dogs. And when I start sewing, I'll start sewing in here so that if there's any kind of bird's nest or dragging, it will go on that leader fabric that's just a throwaway fabric and not on my project. When you're starting off of the edge of something, it's easier to use a leader fabric than to go through all the steps to raise your bobbin thread. Then once I get onto my project, I'll just go back a little bit to knot that. I'm going to turn this around to do the other side of the tissue cover. Now we're back to the ironing board. We have our lobster claw sewn onto that tab. We're going to turn this right side out. Because this tan was bigger than this blue icon, it's going to come off the edges a 1/4 inch. So it's going to make this little part there. So we're going to flatten that out so that the edge is even on both sides. So you don't want to iron it like that, or totally like that. You want it to be centered so you have the same amount of that brown or whatever you're using for the inside of your tissue holder on each side. So once you feel like you have that down, you're just going to press that. Then you're going to fold it into the center. Now you can either just kind of eyeball it and then use a ruler to measure, or if you want to, you can fold it in half, kind of finger press. You do not need to iron that because you don't want to keep a crease there, but you can kind of see it. And then you're going to fold these edges into the center like that. And then we are going to press. Now comes the placement of the clasp. So if you look at this finished one, we don't want the clasp to be where the accent part is, right? We want it to be in between. And if we want to be able to do this box corner, it basically needs to be lined up right next to where that edge is. I'm going to open this up, I'm going to put that down like that, and I'm going to line it up right with that edge. That will give us enough room to do the boxed corner without messing with this and not have this flopping into the hole. So I'm going to do that, fold that back down, clip that in place. And then I'm just going to put 2 clips on this end. And now we are going to go sew those closed. I'm going to use my leader fabric again, and I'm going to sew down both sides with a 1/4 inch seam. Now I have the clasp right here, so we want to make sure that stays in place because I didn't baste it. If you're feeling nervous about it, you could baste it in place before doing this, but for something this small, I've got faith in us. You want to make sure these are going to be staying together as you sew the ends together. So in my original video, I showed you to either serge or zigzag over the edge so that that wasn't going to fray when you're putting tissues in and out of it, because you don't want all of this happening. But this time I'm going to try something different and we'll just see how it works. I'm going to be using pinking shears, and I'm just going to cut the edge, but not cut the stitching with the pinking shears. Ooh, that's really thick to be cutting with pinking shears. I can do it. Or you can also use a wavy rotary blade. But cutting that shape is going to prevent large pieces of thread from fraying from this fabric. So this is going to work just as well. And then I don't have to change the plate and the foot on my sewing machine. So we have that. Now, if we didn't want to do the boxed corners, we would just turn it right side out and it would be done. You would put your tissues in there and it has the cute little tab with the lobster clasp. But we're going to make this a little bit more finished. So I'm going to turn it back again. We're going to do these corners. So what you do is basically this seam line needs to match that fold line. So you're going to put your fingers in there and you're going to fold it like that so that that seam is kind of in the middle, making a triangle. And if you felt it, you could feel that the seam was under this fold. Then I'm going to grab a pen. I'm going to grab a ruler. Now we don't want this to be very big. We want it to just be big enough for a pack of tissues. So you're going to draw a line 3/8 of an inch from the point. So I just have that lined up. Draw on there. And then I'm just going to sew across. Use my scissors to make sure that stays down. And then I'm just going to repeat that on the other 3 corners. Now, when you're doing each end, you want to make sure you fold the edge the same direction so that it's going to make everything sit better. So because I folded this one forward, I'm going to fold this side forward as well. See that? So it's going the same way instead of having it kind of twisted. It's one of those little things that will make a difference in how this is going to sit and work. Now I'm on the part where we have that little tab. So I want to make sure that when I'm pressing that down, that I'm not catching the tab in this corner at all. So just kind of feel your way. You shouldn't if you put it right next to that accent piece. Okay, last one. Now we just are going to turn that right side out, and we have nice finished boxed corners. And we have a little lobster clasp so that we can hook that onto something else. Hook it onto your belt buckle, whatever. So let's take a look at one thing before we put the tissues in. So on this one, I did a zigzag edge. And this one, we used the pinking shears. So this is a much more finished look than this, but this is a lot faster. Either is going to work and hold up. You're not going to get a lot of fraying from that. But if you want to go the extra mile, throw that zigzag foot on there. I just wanted to try the other way since I hadn't tried that before. So then it will hold an entire travel tissue pack. There will be a link below the video. You can buy these in bulk on Amazon. It's less expensive than going to the Dollar Tree. Sometimes even just the value packs at places like Target and Walmart are cheaper. One thing you need to notice is these packs definitely have a top and a bottom. So if I grab this, the tissue pulls and then it's going to pull the next one. Now, if I turn the other side, it's folded on both of these sides, so it's not going to pull out right. So just pay attention to which direction it came out of the bag and make sure that is up. So you're just going to tuck the corners into one side like that, and then just lift the other side over the other corners. And then just move it a little bit and look how cute. So you can do them plain like that, or really easily add a tab. I wouldn't add anything bigger than this because, I mean, you could put a bigger tab onto this size or a bigger D-ring onto this size tab, but there's not a lot of space. We had enough space to make this corner well and to not hit that. But if you did anything wider, it would be too big. So now the new question isn't just boxed corners versus not. It's hang tab versus not. Let me know in the comments what you think.